Imagine a 6-year-old boy sitting in the back seat of a car, eyes wide with wonder, traveling down an American highway for the first time. The giant automobiles rushing past seem impossibly large compared to anything he'd seen in Moscow. This child, whose family had just escaped persecution in the Soviet Union with nothing but their courage and education, would one day organize the world's information and become one of the wealthiest individuals on Earth. His name was Sergey Brin, and his journey from a cramped 3-room Moscow apartment to the gleaming campus of Google would reshape how billions of people access knowledge, forever changing the landscape of human connection and understanding. Welcome to Billionaire Stories Sleep, where our stories will always guide you into a comfortable state for sleep. Let's get started. The story of Sergey Brin begins not with computers or algorithms, but with a decision made out of desperation and hope. On August 21, 1973, Sergey Mikhailovich Brin was born into a Jewish family in Moscow, a city that was then part of the Soviet Union. His parents, Mikhail and Eugenia Brin, were both brilliant minds who had graduated from the prestigious Moscow State University. His father was a mathematician, a man whose mind danced with numbers and patterns, while his mother had trained as a researcher. But in the Soviet Union of the 1970s, their Jewish heritage became an insurmountable barrier, a ceiling that no amount of intelligence or hard work could break through. The Brin family lived in a small 3-room apartment in central Moscow, sharing their modest space with Sergey's paternal grandmother. The apartment was warm with family love but constrained by the realities of Soviet life. Young Sergey would play in the narrow corridors and small rooms, unaware of the storm clouds gathering over his family's future. His father taught mathematics, his passion evident despite the discrimination he faced. His mother worked as a researcher, though opportunities for advancement were systematically denied to Jewish professionals. In 1977, when Sergey was just 4 years old, his father Mikhail returned from a mathematics conference in Warsaw, Poland. What he witnessed there changed everything. In Poland, he saw mathematicians living freely, pursuing their research without the constant shadow of anti-Semitism. He saw Jewish academics holding positions of respect and authority. The contrast with his life in Moscow was stark and undeniable. Upon his return, Mikhail made an announcement that would alter the course of his family's destiny. It was time to leave the Soviet Union. The decision was not made lightly. Leaving meant abandoning everything they knew, their extended family, their language, their culture, the only home they had ever known. But staying meant condemning young Sergey to a future of limited opportunities, closed doors, and systematic discrimination. In September 1978, the family formally applied for their exit visa. The response from the Soviet authorities was swift and punishing. Mikhail was promptly fired from his position. Eugenia was forced to leave her job. For 8 long months, the family survived on temporary work, living in limbo, afraid their application would be denied as it was for countless other refuseniks who dared to dream of freedom. Those months were tense and uncertain. 6-year-old Sergey sensed the anxiety in his parents' voices, the careful conversations that stopped when he entered a room. He didn't fully understand why they were waiting or what they were waiting for, but he felt the weight of anticipation that hung over their small apartment. Finally, in May 1979, the miracle arrived. The family was granted their official exit visas. They could leave. The journey to America was a blur of strange places and unfamiliar faces. First, they traveled to Vienna, where representatives of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society welcomed them and helped process their paperwork. The organization had assisted thousands of Eastern European Jews in establishing new lives in the free world, and now the Brin family was among their charges. From Vienna, they moved to the suburbs of Paris, where Mikhail's former PhD advisor, Anatol Katok, had arranged a temporary research position for him. Katok, who had emigrated just a year earlier, looked after the Brins and paved the way for Mikhail to secure a teaching position at the University of Maryland. On October 25, 1979, the Brin family finally landed in America, touching down at Kennedy Airport in New York. Friends from Moscow met them at the airport, and Sergey's first memory of the United States was sitting in the back seat of their car, amazed by the size of the automobiles on the highway. Everything seemed bigger, brighter, more colorful than the gray Soviet world he'd left behind. The family initially settled in Maryland, where Mikhail began his new position as a mathematics professor at the University of Maryland. Eugenia eventually found work as a researcher at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. The adjustment to American life was challenging but filled with hope. Young Sergey had to learn a new language, adapt to a new culture, and navigate an entirely different educational system. Despite these obstacles, he exhibited an extraordinary aptitude for learning, particularly in mathematics and computers. His father nurtured this talent, tutoring him at home and introducing him to the logical beauty of mathematical thinking. At age 9, his father gave him a Commodore 64 computer, opening a door to a world that would define his future. Sergey attended the Mizken Torah Hebrew School and the Paint Branch Montessori School in Maryland. The Montessori method, with its emphasis on self-directed learning and hands-on exploration, was perfectly suited to his curious and independent mind. He thrived in this environment, his intellect flourishing in the freedom and opportunity that America provided. Later, he enrolled at Eleanor Roosevelt High School in Greenbelt, Maryland, where his mathematical gifts became increasingly evident. His talent was so pronounced that he began taking college-level mathematics courses at the University of Maryland at just 15 years old. He found high school insufficiently challenging and was eager to move forward. Recognizing his readiness, he made the bold decision to drop out of high school after his junior year and enroll full-time at the university. It was an unconventional path, but for Sergey, conventional had never been an option. At the University of Maryland, Sergey's father taught mathematics and computer science, creating a unique dynamic. Here was a young man studying in the same department where his father was a respected professor, following in the footsteps of a man who had sacrificed everything to give his son this opportunity. Sergey excelled in his studies, immersing himself in both mathematics and computer science. He completed his bachelor's degree in just 3 years, graduating with highest honors in May 1993. During his undergraduate years, Sergey demonstrated not just academic brilliance but also a playful curiosity about how things worked. He loved solving complex problems and wasn't afraid to approach challenges from unconventional angles. His professors recognized something special in him, a combination of raw intelligence, creative thinking, and the confidence to pursue ambitious ideas. One summer in 1990, just before Sergey's 17th birthday, his father led a group of gifted high school mathematics students on a 2-week exchange program to the Soviet Union. Mikhail decided to bring the family along, despite concerns about how they might be received by communist authorities. It would give them a chance to visit family members still living in Moscow, including Sergey's paternal grandfather, who was also a PhD mathematician. The trip was revelatory for teenage Sergey. The Soviet Empire was crumbling, and he could see firsthand the bleak reality he had escaped. In the drab, cinderblock landscape and the people's stony expressions of resignation, he witnessed the future that would have been his. The contrast with his life in America was profound. On the second day of the trip, while the group toured a sanitarium in the countryside near Moscow, Sergey took his father aside, looked him in the eye, and said words that would stay with Mikhail forever: "Thank you for taking us all out of Russia." It was a moment of deep gratitude and understanding. At 17, Sergey fully comprehended the sacrifice his parents had made and the opportunity they had given him. That moment crystallized his appreciation for freedom, for meritocracy, for a system that rewarded talent and hard work regardless of ethnic background. It would influence his thinking for the rest of his life. After graduating from the University of Maryland, Sergey won a National Science Foundation Graduate Fellowship, a prestigious award that would support his doctoral studies. In September 1993, he enrolled at Stanford University to pursue a PhD in computer science. Stanford was the epicenter of technological innovation, located in the heart of Silicon Valley, where revolutionary companies like Hewlett-Packard and Sun Microsystems had been born. The atmosphere was electric with possibility. At Stanford, Sergey's research interests included data mining of large text and scientific data sets, and extraction of information from unstructured sources. But the most important discovery he would make at Stanford wasn't a technical one, it was a person. In the spring of 1995, during an orientation program for prospective new students, Sergey was assigned to show a group of potential admits around campus. Among them was Larry Page, a computer engineering graduate from the University of Michigan who was considering Stanford for his graduate studies. By most accounts, Sergey and Larry didn't hit it off immediately. They disagreed about nearly everything during that first meeting, their conversations turning into friendly debates about technology, methodology, and the future of computing. But beneath the surface disagreement was a mutual recognition. Here were two brilliant, ambitious young men who shared a fundamental belief that technology could be used to organize and democratize information in ways that would benefit all of humanity. By the following year, they had struck up a partnership. Both were working on the Stanford Digital Library project, whose goal was to develop enabling technologies for a universal digital library. They began discussing a problem that fascinated them. The rapidly growing World Wide Web was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. Existing search engines were primitive, often returning irrelevant results or missing important information entirely. Larry became particularly interested in the pattern of linkages on the web. He started thinking about web pages the way academics think about research papers, as nodes in a network of citations. In academia, the importance of a paper is partly determined by how many other papers cite it. Larry wondered, could the same principle be applied to web pages? Could you determine the importance and relevance of a page by analyzing how many other pages link to it? The project initially involved an unofficial third founder, lead programmer Scott Hassan, who wrote much of the code to implement Larry's ideas. Larry's supervisor, Terry Winograd, encouraged the project, later recalling it as perhaps the best advice he ever gave. Sergey, supported by his National Science Foundation Fellowship, soon joined the research project. Together, they began working from Larry's dormitory room to build a new type of search engine. They nicknamed their project Backrub because it analyzed the web's backlinks, the links pointing to a given page. The idea was elegantly simple but computationally intensive. A page with many links from other important pages was probably more important itself. But not all links were equal. A link from a heavily linked, authoritative site was worth more than a link from an obscure page. They developed a mathematical algorithm to calculate this, eventually calling it PageRank. The work was consuming. Larry's dorm room became filled with equipment as they assembled a device from spare parts of inexpensive computers to handle the growing computational demands. They scrounged for hard drives, begged for server space, and maxed out credit cards to buy more storage. When Larry's room became too crowded, they converted Sergey's dorm room into an office and programming center. By August 1996, the initial version of their search engine was available on the Stanford website. The results were remarkable. Their search engine didn't just return pages that contained search terms, it returned the most relevant pages, ranked by importance. The difference in quality was immediately apparent to anyone who used it. Word spread quickly beyond Stanford that these two graduate students had created something extraordinary. By early 1997, their system was straining Stanford's computing infrastructure. The Backrub webpage noted that the database was kept on a Sun Ultra Series 2 with 28 gigabytes of disk, a tiny fraction of what would soon be needed. Scott Hassan and Alan Sterenberg provided crucial implementation help. The research paper they wrote, The Anatomy of a Large-Scale Hypertextual Web Search Engine, co-authored with their advisors Rajiv Motwani and Terry Winograd, became one of the most downloaded scientific documents in Internet history. As their search engine grew in popularity, Sergey and Larry realized they had created something with potential far beyond an academic research project. By mid-1998, they were processing about 10,000 searches per day. That's when they understood this could be a business. They registered the domain google.com in 1997. The name came from a misspelling of Google, the mathematical term for the number 1 followed by 100 zeros, a playful reference to the vast universe of data their search engine was designed to explore. But turning a research project into a company required money, expertise, and courage. Sergey and Larry initially tried to sell their PageRank algorithm to existing search engines. They approached Excite, offering to sell the technology for $1 million so they could return to their doctoral studies. Excite declined. AltaVista's parent company wasn't interested either. In retrospect, these rejections were among the most expensive mistakes in business history. Unable to sell their creation, Sergey and Larry decided to build a company themselves. They needed funding. In August 1998, they got their break. David Sheridan, a Stanford professor who had recently sold his company Granite Systems to Cisco for $220 million, arranged a meeting with Andy Bechtolsheim, co-founder of Sun Microsystems. The meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. at David's home in Palo Alto and had to be brief because Andy had another meeting at Cisco at 9 a.m. Andy watched a quick demo of their search engine on David's porch. He immediately grasped its potential. Without lengthy negotiations or due diligence, he went to his car, returned with a check for $100,000 made out to Google Incorporated, and left for his next meeting. There was just one problem: Google Incorporated didn't exist yet. They couldn't deposit the check because they hadn't yet incorporated the company. The check sat in a drawer for weeks while they completed the legal paperwork to create Google Inc. On September 4, 1998, Google Incorporated was officially founded. Sergey and Larry relocated their operation from Larry's dorm room to a friend's garage in Menlo Park, California. The garage belonged to Susan Wojcicki, who would later become a high-ranking Google executive. It was a classic Silicon Valley origin story: two brilliant young men with a revolutionary idea, working in a garage, fueled by pizza and ambition. They quickly secured additional funding from family, friends, and angel investors, raising about $1 million in total. This allowed them to hire their first employee and expand their operations. But even with this early funding, resources were tight. They had to be creative, assembling servers from inexpensive components, negotiating for bandwidth, and working extraordinarily long hours to keep the system running. The culture they created from the beginning was unconventional. Sergey brought a playful energy to the company, balanced by Larry's focus on product excellence. They didn't want to build just another technology company. They wanted to create an organization that would attract the world's brightest minds and give them the freedom to do their best work. This philosophy would later manifest in Google's famous perks, innovative office designs, and the 20% time policy that allowed engineers to spend a portion of their week on passion projects. In 1999, Google received a transformative infusion of capital. Venture capital firms Kleiner Perkins Caulfield and Byers and Sequoia Capital, two of Silicon Valley's most prestigious firms, jointly invested $25 million in the company. This was unusual. These rival firms typically competed rather than collaborated. Their joint investment signaled that something special was happening at Google. The funding came with expectations. The venture capitalists wanted Sergey and Larry to hire an experienced CEO. The founders were initially resistant. They were in their mid-20s, PhD students who had never run a company, but they were protective of their creation and wary of bringing in an outsider who might not share their vision. However, they eventually agreed it was necessary for the company's growth. In August 2001, they hired Eric Schmidt, an experienced technology executive who had previously served as CEO of Novell. Schmidt was a rare combination. He had a PhD in computer science, so he could speak the technical language of Sergey and Larry, but he also had extensive business experience. The arrangement they worked out was unique. Eric would serve as CEO, but the company would be run as a triumvirate, with Larry as president of products, Sergey as president of technology, and Eric as the adult supervision who could navigate Wall Street and corporate partnerships. This period marked a transition from idealistic research project to serious business. They needed to generate revenue. Their solution was elegant. They would sell advertising space alongside search results, but the ads would be relevant to what people were searching for, and they would be clearly marked as ads. The model, which they called AdWords, allowed advertisers to bid on keywords, and Google would display the ads when people searched for those terms. It was a revolutionary approach to online advertising that would generate billions of dollars in revenue. By 2002, Google was processing 150 million searches per day. The simple white page with the multicolored logo had become the default starting point for millions of people's internet journeys. The company expanded rapidly, moving to larger offices and hiring talented engineers, many of whom were attracted by Google's reputation for innovation and its unique culture. In 2003, After outgrowing multiple locations, Google leased an office complex from Silicon Graphics at 1600 Amphitheater Parkway in Mountain View, California. The complex became known as the Googleplex, a play on the word Googleplex. This would become Google's headquarters, a sprawling campus that reflected Sergey and Larry's vision of a workplace that inspired creativity and collaboration. By early 2004, Google was processing 200 million searches per day and had firmly established itself as the world's leading search engine. The company was growing at an extraordinary rate, and it needed capital to fuel further expansion. Sergey and Larry made the decision to take Google public. On April 29, 2004, they filed their initial public offering paperwork with the Securities and Exchange Commission. The IPO process was characteristically unconventional. Rather than using the traditional method where investment banks determine the price and allocate shares to favored clients, Google chose a Dutch auction process. This allowed any investor to bid on shares, democratizing access in a way that aligned with Google's mission to organize information and make it universally accessible. The approach was controversial on Wall Street but true to the founders' principles. The language in the IPO filing revealed that Sergey and Larry were ambivalent about going public. They wrote an unusual founders' letter that included the phrase, "Don't be evil," their informal corporate motto. They explained their vision of building a company focused on the long term, even if it meant foregoing short-term gains. They wanted to make it clear Google would be different. On August 19, 2004, Google went public at $85 per share. The company raised $1.67 billion and achieved a market capitalization of more than $23 billion. Overnight, Sergey and Larry became billionaires. So did many of Google's early employees, who had been compensated partly in stock options. The Google IPO created an instant wealth effect that rippled through Silicon Valley, inspiring a new generation of entrepreneurs. Following the IPO, in a move that surprised many, Sergey, Larry, and Eric Schmidt requested that their salaries be cut to $1 per year. They didn't need salaries. Their wealth came from their stock ownership. This symbolic gesture reinforced their commitment to long-term thinking over short-term compensation. Under Sergey's leadership as president of technology, Google expanded far beyond search. In 2004, the company launched Gmail, offering unprecedented storage space and integrating search functionality into email. In 2005, Google Maps revolutionized online mapping and navigation. The Android mobile operating system, acquired and developed under Google's ownership, would eventually become the world's most popular mobile platform. Perhaps the most significant acquisition came in 2006, when Google purchased YouTube for $1.65 billion in stock. At the time, some analysts questioned the price, but Sergey and Larry saw the future. Video would become a dominant form of online content, and YouTube was positioned to be the platform where that content lived. Time proved them right. Sergey was also involved in more experimental projects. In 2011, he transitioned from president of technology to founder of Google X, a semi-secret research lab focused on moonshot projects, ambitious ideas that could potentially transform entire industries. Projects included self-driving cars, which became Waymo, delivery drones, internet beaming balloons, and Google Glass, a wearable computer in the form of eyeglasses. Not all of these projects succeeded commercially. Google Glass, in particular, faced privacy concerns and struggled to find a clear consumer use case. But Sergey's philosophy was clear: innovation required the freedom to fail. By creating a space where ambitious ideas could be explored without the immediate pressure of profitability, Google could push the boundaries of what technology could achieve. In 2015, Google underwent a major restructuring. Sergey and Larry created Alphabet Incorporated, a holding company that would own Google and other ventures. Google became a subsidiary focused on its core internet services, while other ambitious projects were spun out as separate Alphabet companies. Larry became CEO of Alphabet, and Sergey became its president. This structure allowed them to pursue diverse interests while maintaining the focus and efficiency of the core Google business. Throughout this period of extraordinary growth and success, Sergey remained committed to using his wealth and influence for positive impact. In 2008, he married Anne Wojcicki, co-founder of the genetic testing company 23andMe. Through genetic testing, Sergey learned that he carried a mutation that significantly increased his risk of developing Parkinson's disease, the same disease that afflicted his mother. Rather than being paralyzed by this knowledge, Sergey became one of the world's leading private funders of Parkinson's research. He donated over $1.5 billion to support research aimed at understanding and ultimately curing the disease. His approach was characteristically systematic: fund the fundamentals, scale what works, and align incentives so breakthroughs can arrive sooner. His contributions helped create an ecosystem that channeled hundreds of millions of dollars annually into Parkinson's research, dramatically accelerating the pace of discovery. Beyond Parkinson's research, Sergey's philanthropic efforts extended to education, immigrant rights, climate change, and artificial intelligence ethics. He donated to the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, honoring the organization that had helped his family emigrate from the Soviet Union. He supported scholarship programs at the University of Maryland, giving other students the opportunities that education had given him. In his personal investments, Sergey showed the same forward-thinking approach that characterized his work at Google. He invested in Tesla before electric vehicles were mainstream, was one of the first customers for the Tesla Model X, and supported various ventures in renewable energy, biotechnology, and aerospace. He founded LTA Research and Exploration, a company developing environmentally sustainable lighter-than-air aircraft, reflecting his interest in ambitious, transformative technologies. On December 3, 2019, Sergey and Larry made a surprising announcement. They were stepping down from their executive roles at Alphabet. Sergey resigned as president, and Larry stepped down as CEO. They explained that Alphabet had matured, and it was time for a new generation of leadership. Sundar Pichai, who had been serving as CEO of Google, was promoted to CEO of Alphabet. However, Sergey and Larry remained on Alphabet's board of directors and retained majority voting control through their ownership of supervoting Class B shares. The decision to step back was characteristic of their management philosophy. They had built systems and hired talented people to continue the mission. They trusted those people to lead. And stepping away from day-to-day operations gave them freedom to explore new interests and spend time on problems that excited them. But Sergey didn't disappear. In 2023, when artificial intelligence suddenly emerged as the most transformative technology of a generation, he returned to active involvement at Google. He began spending time at the company pretty much every day, working with teams developing advanced AI systems. His hands-on engineering background and strategic vision were valuable as Google navigated the rapid changes in AI technology. As of 2024, Sergey Brin's estimated net worth fluctuates between $110 billion and $140 billion, depending on Alphabet's stock price and market conditions. He consistently ranks among the 10 wealthiest people on Earth. He owns approximately 5.7% of Alphabet's outstanding shares, though through supervoting shares, he and Larry maintain majority control over the company's strategic direction. This wealth is not merely abstract numbers on a balance sheet. It represents the value that billions of people derive from Google's services every day. When someone searches for information, navigates using Google Maps, watches a video on YouTube, or uses an Android phone, they're touching systems that Sergey helped create. The wealth reflects the enormous positive impact these technologies have had on human knowledge and connectivity. But perhaps more interesting than the accumulation of wealth is what the journey reveals about success, innovation, and character. Sergey Brin's story offers profound lessons that extend far beyond business. First, there is the lesson of resilience and gratitude. Sergey never forgot where he came from. The child who fled anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union grew into a man who championed the free flow of information and supported organizations that help refugees. When Google faced pressure to censor search results in China in 2006, it was Sergey, remembering his own family's experience with censorship, who was particularly troubled by the decision. Though Google initially complied, the company eventually withdrew from mainland China, prioritizing principles over profit in a market of billions. Sergey's immigrant experience gave him a deep appreciation for freedom, meritocracy, and opportunity, values that shaped both Google's culture and his philanthropic priorities. Second, there is the lesson of intellectual courage and curiosity. Sergey and Larry succeeded because they asked a question that seemed obvious in retrospect but revolutionary at the time. What if we used the collective intelligence of the web itself to determine what information was most valuable? They had the courage to pursue this idea even when established companies didn't see its worth. Throughout his career, Sergey has championed moonshot thinking, the willingness to tackle problems so large they seem impossible. This approach accepts failure as a necessary component of innovation. Third, there is the lesson of partnership and complementary strengths. Sergey and Larry's partnership worked because they brought different but complementary skills. Their initial disagreements during that first campus tour weren't obstacles. They were signs of minds that challenged each other, that saw problems from different angles. The best partnerships aren't about agreement on everything. They're about mutual respect, shared values, and complementary abilities. Fourth, there is the lesson of culture and values. From the beginning, Sergey helped create a company culture that prioritized innovation over convention. The famous Google perks, free food, creative office spaces, the 20% time policy, weren't just about attracting talent. They reflected a belief that if you give brilliant people the freedom, resources, and support to do their best work, extraordinary things will happen. This investment in human potential paid enormous dividends. Fifth, there is the lesson of strategic thinking and timing. Sergey and Larry built Google at precisely the moment when the internet was transitioning from a specialized tool to a mass medium. They recognized that search would be the gateway to this new world. Later, they acquired YouTube just as video was becoming central to online experience. They developed Android as mobile computing was taking off. Success wasn't just about having good ideas, it was about understanding where technology was heading and positioning accordingly. Sixth, there is the lesson of using wealth responsibly. Sergey's approach to philanthropy mirrors his approach to business. Identify important problems, fund fundamental research, support talented people doing the work, and think long-term. His $1.5 billion investment in Parkinson's research isn't just charity, it's a strategic effort to accelerate scientific progress in an area where breakthroughs could benefit millions. His support for climate change initiatives, education, and refugee assistance reflects a recognition that great wealth comes with great responsibility. Finally, there is the lesson about the meaning of success itself. Sergey once said, "Obviously everyone wants to be successful, but I want to be looked back on as being very innovative, very trusted and ethical, and ultimately making a big difference in the world." This statement reveals his understanding that success isn't measured merely in dollars but in impact, innovation, and integrity. When we consider Sergey Brin's journey, from that frightened 6-year-old in the back seat of a car, amazed by American automobiles, to a man whose work touches billions of lives daily, we see a story about what becomes possible when talent meets opportunity, when curiosity meets resources, when vision meets execution. His success was not predetermined. It required his parents' courage to leave everything behind for an uncertain future. It required a society that rewarded merit over background. It required encountering the right partner at the right time. It required the freedom to explore ambitious ideas without the burden of immediate commercial success. And it required the wisdom to build systems and cultures that could scale while maintaining their innovative spirit. The technology landscape is constantly evolving. The Google that Sergey and Larry created has itself evolved, facing new challenges from competitors, regulators, and changing user expectations. Artificial intelligence is transforming search and information access in ways that will require continued innovation. But the fundamental principles that Sergey embodied, curiosity, courage, strategic thinking, ethical leadership, and a commitment to improving the world through technology, remain as relevant as ever. As you drift toward sleep, consider the boy who thanked his father for bringing him to America, who studied mathematics by lamplight, who assembled search servers from spare computer parts in a college dorm room. Consider how a simple question about organizing information led to a tool used billions of times each day. Consider how an immigrant who fled persecution became a champion of free information access. Consider how a partnership based on intellectual respect and complementary skills created one of the most valuable companies in history. and consider how wealth, when guided by purpose and principle, can be deployed to tackle humanity's most challenging problems. The story of Sergey Brin reminds us that innovation often comes from unexpected places, that diversity of experience strengthens rather than weakens, that taking risks is essential for progress, that building cultures of trust and freedom unleashes human potential, and that success is ultimately measured not by what we accumulate but by what we contribute. These lessons transcend business and technology. They speak to fundamental questions about how we live, work, create, and make meaning in our lives.